Greetings. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath to everybody. Chag Sameach. Happy festival to everybody. You know, when you come to late December, a lot of people are interested in going to the Holy Land. And there was a plane that was landing in Tel Aviv airport in late December, and the pilot made an announcement. He said, now please, we've now landed, but we're now taxiing up to the gate. So please, remain seated and don't get up and get your things until we have come to a complete stop. And then the announcement came out, to those of you who are still seated, Merry Christmas. Now to those of you who have already gotten up to get your things, Happy Hanukkah. But the Jews have an interesting custom this time of year, as unruly as our people tend to be, and to read the book of Ecclesiastes at this season of the year. And this is a very, I would recommend that, at least you could maybe begin it now and over the next period of time, to read the book of Ecclesiastes, because there's a lot of wisdom in that book. And this season of the year, when we go to keep the festival, these 8 days, is a time when we should be growing in wisdom. It's a time to grow in wisdom. That's what I want to focus on today, that this is a time to grow in wisdom. Now I'm going to be giving material today, and I debated whether I should give it, because I thought, well, a lot of people who actually will see this message, they're pretty much believing what I'm going to say, and they're doing what I'm going to say. So in effect, I'm preaching to the choir. But then I thought, but maybe it will help reinforce them, that they'll say, yes, I am doing the right thing. So it'll be encouraging, to show you, yes, what you're doing is the right thing, and so it will help us to just sort of keep up what we know that we ought to be doing. So first, let me back up and say that the book of Ecclesiastes is really very powerful literature. It's had a very powerful impact on our culture in the Western world. And back in the 1960s, President Kennedy, it was one of Ecclesiastes 3 was one of his favorite passages of scripture, and it was read at his funeral. And earlier in that decade, the pro-communist folk singer Pete Seeger, who had a very long and productive career, as many of you know, put Ecclesiastes 3 to a beautiful melody, and later on it became a rock hit by the Byrds. But I'm more of a folk music type, so I thought, just to get us in the mood for the book of Ecclesiastes, I would like to have you, if you want to turn to the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, and let's listen to Judy Collins sing a bit of the 3rd chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. This is from way back in 1966.
This song was written by Pete Seeger, and the credit to it reads Pete Seeger and Ecclesiastes, because the poem is from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. It's called Turn, Turn, Turn. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. Time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose
hope you enjoyed that. And even if the rest of this talk is very boring, I recommend you stick around, because afterwards I have copies of the sacred calendar for this year for everybody. That'll maybe help you, everybody, to stick around, and you'll get your free calendar. I'd like to go to the book of James, because as we understand, knowledge is the acquisition of data. And then if we know a lot of information, we have knowledge. Then if we know how one fact relates to another, we have understanding. Then if we know how to apply that understanding, then we have wisdom. And wisdom is critically important. And there are various ways of acquiring it. A lot of times it's just by experience, having to make decisions and seeing the results. But there is material that we can study that can help us. And also God himself, who is the really only uniquely wise being in the universe, as the New Testament tells us, can share wisdom with us. He can increase our wisdom. He can give us wisdom supernaturally. And I want to turn to James, the first chapter and the 5th verse on that. James 1 and verse 5. It says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. So one thing in your prayer life, pray for wisdom, because all of us certainly need it. And the Bible does say that we can ask for it. Solomon, as you know, asked for it, and he received it. Unfortunately, towards the end of his life, he seemingly didn't make use of what he had and had to repent of that. And that's very likely why we have the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon's final understanding of life as he comes to near the end of his life. And the book of Ecclesiastes is where I want to focus today. And I want to go to the 9th chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes to begin the talk. And as I said, this is very basic, and most of you are practicing what I'm going to be talking about today, but I thought it'd be useful to go over it. And there are 3 points that I want to go over as a background before I come to the conclusion of Ecclesiastes. And that is that if we are to make something of ourselves, to have a success in life, and to help other people, we need to have a very positive attitude towards work. We need to in effect, really want to work, to get things done, to exert energy. It's very important, because if we don't do anything, nothing happens. And so everything around us, this beautiful facility we have, is because people worked on it. They thought about it, they designed it, and they worked on it. And so work is very important. On the other hand, we are resting today. This is the Sabbath, and God commands us to rest. In other words, we do better if after 6 days we have a 7th day that we rest. And so we should not be, in general in life, workaholics. We should want to work, and we should want to be diligent, but we shouldn't become obsessed with work to the extent that we neglect just the enjoyment of life and interaction with other people. And the third point along those lines is, as we work and as we produce, let's also keep in mind that an ethical community takes care of those in need in that community. Not everybody is capable of doing what most are capable of doing, and some are going to be, in effect, in need of help, and an ethical community will not ignore the needs of those who do need help. Those are all points I wanted to talk about today out of the Bible. And I first want to go to Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10. And there it says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. In other words, do a good job. When you're given a job to do, do it well. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going. Those of you who are very much involved in the Disney culture know the old saying, dead men tell no tales. Well, it's also true that, besides not telling you anything, they can't do anything either. When you're dead, you are dead, and you're not doing anything. So while we're alive, we have the opportunity to accomplish something. And so when we have something to do, we ought to do it well. And the Bible does warn us against being lazy and not wanting to prod ourselves to get up and work and accomplish things. And one reason why organizations have to have managers and supervisors is because people often are not self-starters. They need somebody around to kind of crack the whip and keep them going. I'd like to go to the book of Proverbs, the 6th chapter. And it says, go to the ant, you sluggard, So it gives an example of how we should be. We should be like the ant. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Proverbs 6:6, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. And so he berates people who don't want to work hard and don't want to put forth effort. He says, how long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. So frankly, laziness is a self-destructive habit. Now some people by nature are just more diligent, more active, and they get more done. But others may need to find ways to prod themselves so that they do get more accomplished. I'd like to go to Proverbs 10 and verse 4. Proverbs 10 and verse 4. It says in Proverbs 10:4, he who has a slack hand becomes poor. So if you're not really effective in what you do, if you don't really pay attention to your work, you're not going to be successful. But the hand of the diligent makes rich. It says let me read it all together. Yeah, verse 4. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. And in fact, I wasn't going to read this, but I'll keep reading in the 5th verse. It says, he who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. So once again, the traditional story that maybe some of you seen, the fable of the ant and the grasshopper, and the idea of preparing ahead of time and doing what needs to be done, getting the work accomplished. I'd like to go to Proverbs, the 12th chapter, and verse 24. Proverbs 12 and verse 24. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor. So eventually, if people simply will not work, in some cases, they're going to find that they have to one way or the other, because maybe they've committed some crime where they're going to be incarcerated, or in ancient times, if you're way in debt, so at times one way to get out of that would be to put yourself into a position of slavery for a period of time till you in effect worked off the debt. So obviously it's better not to be in a position like that in the first place. I'd like to go now to the 27th verse of Proverbs 12. It says, the lazy man does not roast what he took in hunting, but diligence is man's precious possession. So if you're the kind of person that has a lot of energy and is a self-motivator, consider yourself blessed. And if you're one that is not that way, that with God's help you can become more that way, become more active and more diligent. I'd like to go to the 26th chapter of Proverbs. There's some very eloquent poetry there, cautioning us against being lazy. Proverbs 26 and verse 13. You can find all kinds of excuses sometimes to not do what's necessary. One problem that I tend to have is procrastination. So I'm a normal person, I figure. So if I have it, probably other people have it too. And, maybe tomorrow I'll deal with it. But anyway, in Proverbs 26, verse 13, it says, the lazy man says there's a lion in the road. A fierce lion is in the streets. You find some excuse for not doing what you ought to do, right? As a door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. The lazy man buries his hand in the bowl. It wearies him to bring it back to his mouth. Very eloquent. You can barely have enough energy to feed yourself. The lazy man, but listen to this. This is very important. The lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. So if you've got some trait that's not good, and somebody says, hey, maybe you should work on that, your tendency is to think, oh, I'm fine, I'm doing great. But no, laziness is something we have to work on and overcome and not make excuses for. Over in the New Testament, in 1 Timothy, a person has a responsibility to his family, to support his family. 1 Timothy 5. If you're in the insurance business, by the way, this is the pivotal scripture. But anyway, 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8. But it says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Or in this case, it says an unbeliever. So you can think you're very spiritual, but if you're not willing to work and support your family, then you may mouth a lot of spiritual sayings, but we need to back that up with behavior. I'd like to go now to 2 Timothy. I'm sorry, I was in 1 Timothy, 2 Thessalonians. Let's just turn one page in your Bible, probably you'll get to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10. All right? This is what the Apostle Paul says. 2 Thessalonians 3:10. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. It's pretty clear, that the Bible does encourage people who are capable of working to work. But on the other hand, we know some people are in need, and they're legitimately in need, and we have an ethical community has a responsibility to take care of those in need. I just want to read one verse on that, which is very critically important. It's Deuteronomy 15 and verse 11. God says, knowing human nature, we're not going to ever have a perfect society this side of the millennium, and so we're always going to have problems. We're always going to have poor people. I realized back in the 60s when that song was being sung, Turn, Turn, Turn. At that same time, we had a president who said he was going to abolish poverty. Didn't happen. Deuteronomy 15 verse 11. For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore, I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor and your needy in your land. So an ethical community does care for those in need. Now, I read you a lot of verses against laziness and in favor of working hard and being diligent. But on the other hand, we have to be very careful that we don't become workaholics and so obsessed with work that we don't take time to enjoy life and we don't take time to interact, with our family. What's the point of the work? I want to go back to that same section of Ecclesiastes, and I read the 10th verse without reading the ones before, but now I'm going to read those if I ever get to the section. Here we go. Ecclesiastes 9. Now I want to go back to verse 7. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 7. Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart. For God has already accepted your works. So once you've put in your time, then enjoy what you've accomplished. Take the time to enjoy it. Eat your bread with joy, drink your wine. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. You don't have to live like the proverbial monk in a monastery, as it were. We can enjoy what God has given us to enjoy. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun. All your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and the labor which you perform under the sun. So enjoy your spouse, enjoy your family. What else is there? You're not just working for the sake of the work. You're working for the sake of then being able to share that with your family and share time with your family. I'd like to go to Psalm 128. Look at Psalm 128, or an hour later. When you eat the labor of your hands, you shall be happy, and it shall be well with you. Your wife shall be like a fruitful vine in the very heart of your house, your children like olive plants all around your table. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the eternal. So what good is it to have your wife and your children around the table if you're not there with them? You want to enjoy your time with your wife and your children, as it says in Psalm 128. I'd like to go now to Deuteronomy 6. In Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter, it talks about the importance of knowing what God has to say and then sharing it with your children. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Well, again, You know, if you're not home, if you're not with them, or if you're not, let's say, on trips with them or wherever, if you're not going to have opportunity to discuss these matters with them if you're not around them. So, as I said, there's a balance. We have to be hardworking, but at the same time, we should take time to savor life and to especially spend time, with our family. So there's a balance there, and that's why we do need wisdom. We need wisdom to be able to have that balance. So I thought that would be a helpful, one helpful bit of information, bit of wisdom that is based on the book of Ecclesiastes and related material. Now I do want to go back there and go to how the book concludes. I want to go to the conclusion of the book of Ecclesiastes. And here we now are in the 12th chapter. I'm going to the final chapter of the book. Solomon, of course, at the end of his life, as I said, had not really exercised the wisdom he had exercised in his younger years. He began to think of himself as a kind of exception to the rule. Other people need to learn to do these things, but somehow, I can be an exception. Well, it didn't work out that way. In chapter 12, he says, "Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them." So while you're still young is when you should begin to understand these things. It's so much better, so your life is so much better if you accept these things as a young person and go through life with this kind of information. Yesterday I had the opportunity, towards the evening, there were a group of people singing songs of a spiritual nature, and there had been a couple that had been married for 58 years. So and still you could see how they were interacting, at least in public. The way they interacted was very inspiring, and so evidently they caught the vision when they were young that they needed to make that kind of commitment, and then they stayed with it all this time. Anyway, in verse 2, while the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim. There's these various terminology for what happens as we age, and we're not able to really do the things we were able to do in the past. Various metaphorical language for the aging process. When the doors are shut in the streets and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of music are brought low. Also they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, I guess maybe, the whiteness, as we get white, and as we age, the grasshopper is a burden and desire fails. A man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. So ultimately, we don't live forever. We do come to the end of the road. Then the question is, what kind of record have we written for ourselves? So he says, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. I think he's kind of having fun here, bringing out these various expressions. In other words, the point is you only have so many years to live. Make the most of it, and particularly in the spiritual sense, because really our ultimate destiny is to be part of God's family, to be spirit and share eternity with Him. And then he mentions, finally, there does come a time when life ends. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. When the power that we had, the spirit power that we had, that enabled us to be human, that gave us our capacity, returns to God, and it's no longer functioning. It's like a lamp, I can shut off the lamp, I can turn on the lamp. So when the lamp is turned on, it's like when the spirit is in you, and when you die, the lamp is shut off. The electricity is not flowing anymore because there's no need for it, because you're not around. Follow what I'm saying? The analogy there. We have a spirit in us that is there functioning while we're alive, and then when we're not alive, it's no longer functioning. It goes back to God because He gave it to us in the first place. And so he finally says, when all is said and done, all physical things will eventually go away. It's all so much vanity, hot. It's all so much vapor. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. And then, though, we have a final conclusion that, an addendum to get us back into a proper perspective, so we're not just sort of cynical about the whole thing. And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs, which we fortunately have in our Bible today. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright, words of truth. And I've given you some of them this morning. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails, driven by one shepherd. So really all of the books that we have of the Bible, in effect have one author ultimately. God inspired all this material to be put together in various ways, but the same inspiration. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. So you could go on and on and on doing research into all kinds of matters which people do. But ultimately, when all is said and done, remember the main point of life is to have a right relationship with God and to look forward to our ultimate destiny to be part of his family. And so he says, after all is said and done, let's go to the conclusion of the matter. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. This is really the essence of being human, is to live a godly life, because then we will fulfill our destiny, our potential. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. God is omniscient, God is omnipotent, and we can't really hide from him. He knows our thoughts, he knows our words, he knows our deeds. I want to go to the Gospel of Mark, the 4th chapter, and verse 22. Mark 4 and verse 22, where this is also brought out very dramatically. For there is nothing, Jesus says, for there is nothing hidden which will not be revealed, nor has anything been kept secret but that it should come to light. So we can't really hide our thoughts, our words, our actions. God is very much aware of it all. And we are writing a record that we're going to be held accountable for. But we understand, through Jesus Christ, we can, of course, have a right relationship with God, and we can be, let's say, restored. I'm trying to think of the right word. Justified is the word. Even though we have been imperfect, we can be justified through our relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Now, yesterday I talked about the book of Matthew as focusing on God's kingdom, and really that is the focus of this entire festival. When all is said and done, as the book of Ecclesiastes says, what's really important is what is spiritual and what is godly. And so I want to conclude by going to Matthew 6 and verse 33, because this really is the lesson we're supposed to get out of keeping this festival. That however many restaurants you've gone to, however many concerts, however many museums you visited, or however many beautiful scenes of nature you've seen, all of that, is really not as important as ultimately your eternal destiny. Your eternal future is more important than any of those things. And ultimately, by the end of the week, you come to that conclusion. Hopefully we've come to it before then, but we will eventually if we keep this festival properly. Matthew 6 and verse 33. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Whatever else we need, God will take care of that. But ultimately, we have to seek first his kingdom. And so this is indeed a season to grow in wisdom. So enjoy the rest of the Sabbath and the rest of this festival, and all the best, those of you who are viewing out there, and those of you in this room, all the best to you and yours.